The bologna sandwich fell from his trembling hands as the lawyer's words echoed through the courthouse hallway. Without stable housing and consistent income, you'll lose them forever. Before we dive into this heart-wrenching story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an incredible tale about a homeless veteran whose life changed when a mysterious woman left him an inheritance. Marcus Bennett sat on the cold courthouse steps, his hands still shaking as he stared at the crumpled custody papers. 3 months. That's all he had left to prove he deserved to keep his children. The September wind cut through his worn jacket, but he barely noticed. All he could think about was the look in his twins' eyes when he dropped them off at their grandmother's that morning. "Daddy, when are we coming home?" 7-year-old Jasmine had asked, her braids bouncing as she clutched her favorite stuffed elephant. "Soon, baby girl," he'd promised, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass in his chest. Real soon. Her twin brother Jordan had just nodded, trying to be brave at 7 years old, already understanding more than any child should about why Daddy couldn't keep them right now. Marcus had watched them disappear into the house, his ex-wife's mother shooting him a look that said everything. "You're failing them." Now, sitting outside the courthouse with his last $7 in his wallet and a bologna sandwich he'd made that morning, Marcus felt the weight of those 3 months pressing down on him. The construction job had ended 2 weeks ago. The studio apartment had a leak the landlord refused to fix. His car needed new tires he couldn't afford. Every card in his hand felt stacked against him. He unwrapped the sandwich slowly, his stomach tight with worry more than hunger. That's when he heard it, soft crying from the bench beside him. A woman sat there, elegant even in her distress, her head buried in her hands. She wore a tailored navy suit that looked expensive, her hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun that highlighted her graceful neck. Even through her tears, Marcus could see she was beautiful. Smooth, dark skin, high cheekbones, the kind of presence that commanded attention. She looked up suddenly, catching him staring. Her eyes were red-rimmed but striking, deep brown with flecks of gold. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two strangers, united by the universal language of pain. "Sorry," she whispered, wiping her cheeks with a tissue. "I didn't mean to." "No need to apologize," Marcus said softly. Courthouse steps aren't exactly known for bringing out people's happiest moments. A bitter laugh escaped her. "You could say that." She glanced at the sandwich in his hands, then quickly looked away. But Marcus caught something in that glance. Not judgment, but hunger. The way her throat moved when she swallowed. The slight tremor in her hands. Without thinking, Marcus tore the sandwich in half. It wasn't much. White bread, bologna, a thin spread of mustard. But it was what he had. He held out half to her. "Here," he said simply. Her eyes widened. "Oh, I couldn't. Please." He kept his hand extended. "Looks like we're both having the kind of day where a shared sandwich might help." Maya Washington stared at the offered sandwich, her stomach clenching with a hunger she'd been ignoring for 2 days. The irony wasn't lost on her. A circuit court judge, secretly struggling to make ends meet after her divorce had drained her savings and her mother's cancer treatments had taken the rest. She'd been too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to admit that the woman who decided other people's fates couldn't even afford lunch. She took the sandwich with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it more than he could possibly know. They ate in companionable silence, two strangers sharing a meal on courthouse steps while the world rushed by. Maya noticed how carefully he ate, savoring each small bite like it might be his last meal for a while. She recognized that careful conservation. She'd been doing it herself lately. "Custody hearing?" she asked gently, nodding toward the papers still clutched in his other hand. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Yeah, final hearing in 3 months. If I can't prove I've got stable housing and income by then." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Your kids?" "Twins. 7 years old. Jasmine and Jordan." His voice broke slightly on their names. "They're everything to me, but their mom died 2 years ago, car accident, and her mother thinks I can't take care of them properly. Maybe she's right. I mean, look at me." He gestured at his worn clothes, his calloused hands. "Can't even afford a decent lunch, sharing bologna sandwiches with strangers." Maya's heart clenched. The raw pain in his voice, the love for his children evident in every word. It was exactly the kind of case that kept her awake at night. The system she served was supposed to protect children, but sometimes she wondered if it just broke families apart. "I'm sure you're doing your best," she said softly. "My best isn't good enough." He crumpled the sandwich wrapper, his hand shaking. "I work construction when I can find it. 60, 70 hours a week sometimes. But the jobs dry up, and childcare costs more than I make some weeks. Their grandmother has money, stability, a big house in the suburbs. All I've got is love, and apparently that doesn't count for much in court." Maya wanted to tell him he was wrong, that love mattered more than anything. But she'd seen too many cases where good parents lost their children to circumstances beyond their control. Instead, she found herself sharing something she hadn't told anyone. "My father raised me alone," she said quietly. "My mother left when I was 3. He worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. We lived in a tiny apartment above a Chinese restaurant. I did homework by the light of the neon sign outside our window because sometimes he couldn't pay the electric bill." Marcus looked at her, really seeing her for the first time. This polished, professional woman had known struggle too. "But every night," Maya continued, "no matter how tired he was, he'd sit with me while I did homework. He'd make up stories about brave princesses who fought dragons and became judges and doctors and presidents. He never missed a school play, even if it meant losing a shift. He taught me that love isn't measured in square footage or bank accounts." She paused, lost in memory. "I became a judge because of him. Because I wanted to make sure other kids like me had a chance, that the system saw the value in parents who might not have much but gave everything." What happens next will reveal a truth that changes everything and shows why sometimes grace appears in the most unexpected moments. If you're moved by this story of struggle and hope, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus studied the woman beside him, seeing past the expensive suit to something deeper. There was a sadness in her eyes that matched his own, a weight she carried that had nothing to do with the briefcase at her feet. "You said you became a judge," he said softly. "Your father must be proud." Maya's smile was bittersweet. "He passed last year. Cancer. I spent everything I had trying to save him, sold my house, cashed out my retirement. The treatments gave us 6 more months, worth every penny, but..." She gestured at herself with a self-deprecating laugh. "Here I am, a judge who can't afford lunch, crying on courthouse steps like the world's most pathetic legal professional." "You're not pathetic," Marcus said firmly. "You loved your father. You sacrificed for him. That's what family does." They sat in silence for a moment, the September sun warming their faces. Maya found herself studying Marcus's hands, scarred and calloused from manual labor, but gentle as he folded the custody papers and tucked them away. He had kind eyes, she noticed. Tired, worried, but kind. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said suddenly. "If you could tell the judge one thing about yourself, something that isn't in those papers, what would it be?" Marcus thought for a long moment. "I'd tell them about bedtime," he said finally. "Every night, no matter how tired I am, I do this thing with the twins. We call it dream building. They tell me what they want to dream about, and I help them build the story. Jasmine always wants to dream about being a doctor who helps kids. Jordan wants to be an engineer who builds bridges to connect people." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Last week, Jordan asked if we could build a dream bridge that would bring them back home to me." Maya had to look away, blinking rapidly. In all her years on the bench, she'd read thousands of custody reports, but they never captured moments like these, the daily acts of love that couldn't be quantified or filed in triplicate. "I know I don't look like much," Marcus continued. "I know their grandmother can give them things I can't. Private schools, vacations, a big backyard. But I show up. Every day, I show up. When Jasmine had nightmares after her mom died, I slept on the floor by her bed for 6 months. When Jordan struggled with reading, I checked out every book on dinosaurs from the library because that's what interested him. I might not have much, but what I have is theirs. Always." Maya felt tears threatening again. How many cases had she presided over where parents had everything except what mattered most? The willingness to show up, to sacrifice, to love unconditionally. "You know what I think?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think your kids are lucky. Things are hard right now, but they have a father who loves them enough to fight for them. To share his last sandwich with a stranger while carrying the weight of possibly losing them. That means something. Marcus looked at her, something shifting in his expression. You speak like someone who understands. I do. Maya stood, brushing off her skirt. More than you know. She reached into her purse, pulling out a business card. For a moment, she hesitated. What she was about to do went against every ethical guideline she'd sworn to uphold. But sometimes, she thought, justice required more than blind impartiality. She handed him the card. There's a program through the courthouse, helps parents with job training and placement. Construction experience qualifies you for several union positions with better stability and benefits. The woman who runs it is a friend. Tell her Maya sent you. Marcus looked at the card, then back at her. Maya? That's your name? She nodded. Maya Washington. Marcus Bennett. He stood, extending his hand. When she shook it, he noticed her hand was soft, but her grip was firm. Thank you for listening, for sharing your story, for this. He held up the card. Thank you for sharing your lunch, she replied. And Marcus, don't give up. The system isn't always fair, but sometimes it gets things right. Keep fighting for those babies. As she walked away, Marcus called out, Maya? She turned. I hope whatever brought you here today works out okay. She smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed in weeks. You know what? I think it just did. The October rain drummed against the windows of the small community center where Marcus sat with 12 other parents, all learning interview skills for union jobs. 6 weeks had passed since that day on the courthouse steps, and his life had begun to shift in small but meaningful ways. The program Maya had recommended was more than job training. It was a lifeline. They helped with interview clothes, resume writing, even provided childcare during classes. Marcus had interviewed for 3 positions already, and the coordinator seemed optimistic about his chances with the pipefitters union. Remember, the instructor was saying, they're not just hiring your skills, they're hiring your character. Let them see who you are. Marcus thought about Maya's words that day, about showing up, about love being measured in presence, not presence. He'd written them down, kept them folded in his wallet next to the photo of his twins. 3 blocks away, Maya sat in her chambers, reviewing case files for the next morning's docket. Her assistant knocked, entering with a fresh stack of folders. The 9 a.m. custody cases, Your Honor. The Bennett case is first up. Maya's blood ran cold. With trembling fingers, she opened the folder. There, staring back at her, was Marcus's face in the attached photograph. Marcus Bennett versus Patricia Williams. Custody determination for minor children, Jasmine and Jordan Bennett. She should have known, should have checked the docket that day, but she'd been so lost in her own struggles, so caught up in the moment of human connection, that she'd never asked his last name until he'd offered it, and Bennett was common enough that it hadn't triggered any alarms. Her hands shook as she read through the file. Everything he'd told her was there in black and white. The construction work, the housing instability, the grandmother's petition for full custody based on inability to provide stable environment. But what wasn't there, what could never be captured in legal documents, was the man who'd shared his last sandwich with a stranger, who built dreams with his children every night, who loved with a fierceness that poverty couldn't diminish. Maya closed her eyes, her oath as a judge warring with her conscience. She should recuse herself immediately. Any conversation with a party outside of court was grounds for removal from the case. But if she did that, the case would go to Judge Harrison, who she knew favored wealth and traditional stability over everything else. Marcus would lose his children. That night, Maya sat in her small apartment. She'd downsized after selling her house for her father's treatment, staring at her laptop. She'd pulled every record she could find on Marcus Bennett. No criminal history, no substance abuse, no history of violence or neglect, just a man caught in the grinding gears of poverty, trying to hold on to his children. She thought about her own father, how many times they'd been one paycheck away from disaster, how many nights he'd gone hungry so she could eat. The system had nearly taken her from him twice. Once when she was 8 and a teacher noticed her shoes were held together with duct tape. Again when she was 12 and they'd been evicted. Both times, judges had looked past the surface to see the love underneath. Now, she was the judge. And tomorrow, she would hold a family's future in her hands. Marcus arrived at the courthouse early, wearing the one suit he owned, the one he'd worn to his wife's funeral. Jasmine and Jordan were with their grandmother, as required. He'd kissed them goodbye that morning, promising to see them soon, praying it wasn't a lie. His lawyer, a harried public defender juggling too many cases, met him outside the courtroom. "Okay, Mr. Bennett, remember what we discussed. Be respectful, answer honestly, and whatever you do, don't lose your temper if opposing counsel brings up the housing situation." Marcus nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He followed his lawyer into the courtroom, taking his seat at the defendant's table. Patricia Williams sat across from him, her lawyer looking confident and well prepared. She'd never liked him, had never thought he was good enough for her daughter. Now she had the chance to prove it to the world. All rise for the Honorable Judge Maya Washington. Marcus's head snapped up as the side door opened. His heart stopped. There she was, the woman from the courthouse steps. But now she wore black robes, her hair pulled back in the same elegant bun, her face a mask of professional neutrality. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second before she looked away. "Please be seated," Maya said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. She had made her decision the night before. She would not recuse herself, but she would also not let their conversation influence her decision. She would listen to the evidence, review the facts, and decide based solely on the best interest of the children. It was the only way to honor both her oath and her conscience. We're here today in the matter of Bennett versus Williams, regarding custody of minor children Jasmine and Jordan Bennett. I've reviewed the submitted documentation. We'll begin with opening statements. Patricia Williams' lawyer went first, painting a picture of instability and neglect. Not intentional neglect, he was careful to say, but the inevitable result of poverty. He cited the 3 different addresses Marcus had lived at in the past 2 years, the inconsistent employment, the times the children had been left with neighbors when childcare fell through. "My client isn't seeking to punish Mr. Bennett," the lawyer concluded. "She simply wants what's best for her grandchildren, stability, consistency, and opportunity." Marcus's lawyer stood, doing his best with limited resources. He talked about Marcus's devotion, his work ethic, the lack of any substantive complaints about his parenting, but even Marcus could hear how thin it sounded against the weight of economic reality. Then came testimony. Patricia Williams took the stand first, describing finding the children doing homework by candlelight when the power had been shut off, the time she'd had to buy them winter coats because Marcus couldn't afford new ones. "I don't doubt that he loves them," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "But love doesn't pay rent or keep the lights on." When it was Marcus's turn, he sat in the witness chair feeling exposed and small. His lawyer walked him through the basic questions: his work history, his plans for stable housing, his relationship with the children. "Mr. Bennett," his lawyer said, "tell the court about your daily routine with the children." Marcus's voice was quiet but clear. "I wake them up at 6:30 every morning. Jasmine likes to pick out her own clothes, so we do that together. Jordan needs help with his buttons sometimes. We eat breakfast together, usually cereal, sometimes eggs if I have them. I walk them to the bus stop, wait until they get on safely." He continued, describing homework, time, dinner, baths, the bedtime ritual of dream building. As he spoke, his voice grew stronger, more certain. "I know I don't have much," he said, looking directly at Maya for the first time, "but what I have, I give to them. Every morning they wake up knowing they're loved. Every night they go to sleep knowing I'm there. That has to count for something." Maya had to look down at her papers, blinking hard. She'd presided over hundreds of custody cases, but none had ever hit her with such personal force. The grandmother's lawyer stood for cross-examination, his tone sympathetic but firm. "Mr. Bennett, you were recently sharing a bologna sandwich on the courthouse steps because you couldn't afford a full lunch, weren't you?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Yes. And this is the level of financial security you're offering these children?" "Objection," Marcus's lawyer called out. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "I'll rephrase," the lawyer said smoothly. "Mr. Bennett, can you guarantee that these children will have 3 meals a day in your care?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he lifted his head. "I can guarantee that if my children are hungry, I'll go without food before they do. I can guarantee that if they need shoes, I'll wear mine until they fall apart. I can guarantee that every decision I make puts them first. Can everyone in this room say the same?" Maya's hands clenched under the bench. She wanted to call a recess, to run from this room where her 2 worlds were colliding. But she stayed, listening to the evidence, performing her duty, even as her heart broke with each word. The testimony continued for 2 more hours. Financial records were presented. The guardian ad litem spoke about her observations. Through it all, Maya kept her face neutral, professional, giving no sign of the turmoil within. Finally, both lawyers made their closing arguments. The grandmother's lawyer spoke of resources and opportunities. Marcus's lawyer spoke of love and dedication. Both were right. Both were incomplete. "I'll render my decision after a brief recess," Maya announced, rising quickly and retreating to her chambers. Alone, she pressed her palms against her eyes. The law was clear. Decisions must be based on the best interests of the children. But what did that mean? Material comfort with a grandmother who loved them but didn't truly know them? Or struggle with a father who would share his last sandwich with a stranger while fighting to keep them? She thought about her own childhood, the sacrifices her father had made. She thought about Marcus's words that day on the steps, about showing up, about building dreams. She thought about the program she'd recommended him for, how he'd taken that small opportunity and run with it. 20 minutes later, she returned to the courtroom. Everyone rose. Then Saturday, the silence was suffocating. "This court has considered all testimony and evidence presented," Maya began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to do. "The court recognizes Mrs. Williams' concerns and acknowledges the material advantages she can provide." Patricia Williams smiled slightly, sensing victory. "However," Maya continued, "this court also recognizes that the best interests of children cannot be measured solely in material terms. The evidence shows that Mr. Bennett, despite financial hardships, has been a consistent, loving, and devoted parent. The children are bonded to him, and he to them." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Furthermore, the court notes that Mr. Bennett has taken concrete steps to improve his economic situation, enrolling in job training programs and actively seeking stable employment. The court believes that with appropriate support and resources, Mr. Bennett can provide both the love and the stability these children need." Marcus's lawyer grabbed his arm, warning him to stay calm, but Marcus barely heard him. His eyes were locked on Maya. "Therefore," Maya said, "this court orders that primary custody shall remain with Mr. Bennett, with the following conditions. Mr. Bennett must maintain stable housing and continue his job training program. Mrs. Williams shall have visitation every other weekend and 1 evening per week. The court also orders Mr. Bennett to apply for all available support services, including food assistance and childcare subsidies." She looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Bennett, this court is giving you an opportunity. Do not waste it. These children deserve the father who fights for them, who shows up every day, who builds dreams with them every night. Be that father." The gavel came down with finality. The courtroom erupted. Patricia Williams' lawyer immediately stated they would appeal. Marcus's lawyer was shaking his hand, talking about next steps, but Marcus heard none of it. He was watching Maya gather her papers and leave through the side door, disappearing as suddenly as she'd appeared that day on the steps. Outside the courtroom, Marcus stood in the hallway, overwhelmed. He'd won. He'd actually won. In 3 hours, he could pick up his children and bring them home. "Mr. Bennett," he turned to find a court clerk holding an envelope. "Judge Washington asked me to give you this." Marcus took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "Mr. Bennett, the program I mentioned has an opening in their advanced placement track. It includes child care assistance and leads directly to union positions with full benefits. The coordinator is expecting your call. Remember what we talked about that day. Love isn't measured in what you have, but in how you show up. Keep showing up. Also, there's a small fund available for emergency assistance for parents in crisis. I've included the application. It's not charity. It's investment in families who deserve a chance. M." Below the note were 2 forms, one for the advanced job program, one for emergency assistance that would help with rent and utilities while he transitioned to better employment. Marcus sank onto a nearby bench, the letter clutched in his hands. She'd risked everything to give his family a chance. Somehow, she'd found a way to be both the impartial judge and the compassionate woman who'd shared his sandwich that desperate September day. 6 months later, spring had arrived in full bloom. Marcus stood in the small backyard of their new apartment. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe, with 2 bedrooms and a tiny patch of grass where the twins could play. He wore the uniform of Local 488, the pipefitters union that had hired him after completing the advanced training program. "Daddy, push me higher," Jasmine called from the swing set he'd assembled the previous weekend, paid for with his first full union paycheck. "My turn next," Jordan shouted, practicing soccer moves with the ball Marcus had surprised him with. The job provided steady income, health insurance, even a small college savings plan for the kids. The apartment was in a better school district. The nightmares about losing them had finally stopped. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor about overtime available the next day. Marcus smiled. 6 months ago, he would have jumped at any extra hours, desperate for every penny. Now, he could afford to say no, to save his Saturdays for the twins. "Kids, wash up for dinner," he called. They ran inside, racing each other as always. As he followed them, Marcus thought about the woman who'd changed their lives with a shared sandwich and quiet courage. He'd wanted to thank her properly, had even gone back to the courthouse once. But of course, he couldn't approach her. It would be inappropriate, potentially damaging to her career. But sometimes he'd see her from afar, walking to her car after a long day, and he'd send up a silent prayer of gratitude. She'd saved his family, not just with her ruling, but with her humanity that day on the steps, her willingness to see him as more than his circumstances. Maya Washington sat in her chambers, reviewing the day's cases. Her situation had improved too. A small inheritance from a distant aunt had eased the financial pressure, and she'd been able to move to a better apartment, one where she didn't worry about the heat being shut off. Her assistant knocked. "Your 2 o'clock is here. The quarterly review for the Parent Support Initiative." Maya smiled. The program she'd quietly championed had helped dozens of families stay together. Judges weren't supposed to be activists, but she'd found ways to work within the system, connecting struggling parents with resources, advocating for policies that recognized the value of love over lucre. The meeting was productive, full of success stories. Employment rates up, custody reversals down, families stabilized. As the coordinator read through the statistics, one case stood out. A single father who'd gone from unemployed construction worker to union pipe fitter, maintaining stable custody of his twins. "No names," Maya said quietly. "But tell me about that case." The coordinator smiled. "One of our best outcomes. The father completed advanced training in record time, perfect attendance. His supervisor says he's one of the most reliable workers they have. The kids are thriving in school. The daughter wants to be a doctor. The son, an engineer. They're building bridges," the father likes to say. Maya had to turn toward the window, ostensibly checking the time, actually blinking back tears. Building bridges. She remembered Marcus talking about his son's dreams. "Good," she managed. "That's very good." After the meeting, Maya walked to her car in the fading spring light. As she passed the courthouse steps, she paused. The bench where they'd sat was empty, but she could still see it. Two strangers sharing a sandwich, sharing their pain, finding unexpected grace in each other's company. She'd broken protocol that day. Technically, she'd committed an ethical violation by not immediately recusing herself from his case, but she'd learned something important. Sometimes justice required more than blind impartiality. Sometimes it required the courage to see people as more than their circumstances, to recognize that the law served humanity, not the other way around. A movement caught her eye. Across the street, a familiar figure emerged from the corner store. Marcus Bennett, still in his union uniform, carrying groceries and laughing at something on his phone. He looked different, stronger, more confident, like a man who'd weathered the storm and found solid ground. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. He stopped walking. She stood frozen. The moment stretched, filled with everything they couldn't say. Then Marcus did something simple. He placed his hand over his heart and gave a small bow of his head. Not dramatic, not obvious to anyone watching, but clear in its meaning. "Thank you for everything." Maya's hand moved to her own heart in response. The briefest gesture. "You're welcome. You earned it." Then he was gone, walking toward home, toward his children, toward the life he'd fought so hard to keep. Maya got in her car, driving toward her own quiet apartment, carrying the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the system could work, that justice and mercy could walk hand in hand. The following September, exactly 1 year after their first meeting, Maya found herself back on those same courthouse steps. Not crying this time, but taking a moment to eat lunch in the early fall sunshine. She'd bought a sandwich from the deli across the street, turkey and Swiss, a far cry from bologna, but the memory remained. She wasn't surprised when she heard footsteps approaching, somehow knew who it would be before she looked up. Marcus stood there, looking uncertain. He wore casual clothes, not his work uniform, and carried a small paper bag. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I know I shouldn't approach you. It's been a year, and I wanted to." He held out the bag. "I brought lunch. Thought maybe I could return the favor." Maya looked around. The courthouse was quiet, most people at lunch. No one paying attention to a judge and a citizen having a conversation on public steps. "Sit," she said softly, "but not too close. And if anyone asks, you're asking for directions to the clerk's office." He sat on the far end of the bench, careful to maintain professional distance. From the bag, he pulled out 2 wrap sandwiches from the good deli, the one she could never quite justify the expense for. "Turkey and Swiss," he said. "I asked them what judges usually order." Despite herself, Maya laughed. "You asked them what judges eat?" The guy behind the counter looked at me like I was crazy. Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his face. But then he said, "Turkey and Swiss. Hold the mayo. Extra masseuse." Said a judge comes in every week, orders the same thing. Maya shook her head, smiling as she took the sandwich. "That would be Judge Harrison. I'm more of a club sandwich person myself." "I'll remember that for next time," Marcus said, then caught himself. "Not that there should be a next time. I just meant, I know what you meant." She unwrapped the sandwich, taking a small bite. "How are the twins?" His face lit up. "Amazing. Jasmine made honor roll. Jordan's playing Little League. They're happy. Really happy." He paused. "They're with their grandmother this weekend. We've actually worked things out. She sees now that, well, that money isn't everything. I'm glad." And she was, deeply. They ate in companionable silence, just as they had a year ago. But everything was different now. The desperation was gone, replaced by quiet dignity. The tears replaced by tentative smiles. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said finally. "That day when you gave me that card, recommended the program, did you know who I was? What was coming?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said honestly. "I had no idea. If I had, I never would have. I would have walked away immediately. But you didn't. After, when you saw me in your courtroom, you could have recused yourself. Should have, probably." She nodded. "Yes, why didn't you?" Maya set down her sandwich, choosing her words carefully. "Because I realized something that day. The system I serve, it's supposed to be about justice. But justice without mercy, without understanding the full humanity of the people it affects, that's not justice at all. It's just process." She turned to look at him directly. "You shared your last sandwich with a stranger who was crying on courthouse steps. You showed compassion when you had every reason to be consumed by your own problems. That told me more about what kind of father you are than any financial statement ever could." Marcus was quiet, absorbing this. "You took a huge risk. You were taking a bigger one, fighting a system stacked against you, powered by nothing but love for your children." She smiled softly. "Besides, I didn't influence the outcome. I simply chose not to let our chance encounter disqualify me from doing my job. The decision was based entirely on the evidence presented, the evidence and a judge who understood what it meant to grow up with a parent who had nothing but love to give," Marcus said quietly. They finished their sandwiches in silence, both understanding that this moment was a gift, a closure neither had expected. As Maya rose to leave, Marcus stood too. "Judge Washington? Yes? Thank you. Not just for the ruling, for seeing me, for seeing us, for giving us a chance to prove that love matters more than anything else." Maya nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett, for reminding me why I became a judge in the first place, and for sharing your sandwich with a stranger who needed it more than you knew." She walked back into the courthouse, back to her chambers and her cases, and her careful balance of justice and mercy. Marcus headed home to prepare for his children's return the next day, to the life he'd almost lost and fought to keep. Neither looked back, but both carried with them the knowledge that sometimes grace appears in the simplest moments, in shared sandwiches and honest words, in the courage to see beyond circumstances to the heart beneath. That night, Maya sat in her chambers after hours, drafting a proposal for a new initiative, a mentorship program pairing struggling parents with those who'd successfully navigated the system. She thought of Marcus as she wrote, of all the parents who just needed someone to see their worth beyond their bank accounts. Miles away, Marcus tucked his children into bed, building dreams of bridges and healing, of futures bright with possibility. As they drifted off to sleep, he whispered a prayer of gratitude for the judge who'd looked past his poverty to see his heart, who'd risked her career to keep a family together. The city hummed with life around them, millions of stories intersecting and diverging, but few as unlikely as theirs. A judge and a single father, connected by a bologna sandwich and the shared understanding that sometimes the most important laws are written not in books, but in acts of simple human kindness. Justice and mercy had met on courthouse steps, shared a meal, and changed two lives forever. And in that meeting, in that moment of grace, the system had worked exactly as it should. Not blind, but seeing. Not rigid, but flexible enough to recognize that sometimes the greatest poverty is not in empty pockets, but in empty hearts. And the greatest wealth is love freely given, fiercely protected, and courageously defended. The twins grew strong in their father's love, building bridges to bright futures. Maya continued serving justice with newfound purpose, remembering always that behind every case was a human being deserving of dignity. And somewhere in the city, on courthouse steps where strangers sometimes sat in tears, their story lived on, a whispered legend of hope that reminded everyone who heard it that kindness, once given, ripples outward in waves that never truly end. This story touches the heart with its message about how a single act of kindness can transform lives. If you believe in the power of compassion and second chances, if you think love matters more than money, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow, we'll share another incredible story that will restore your faith in humanity. Click on one of the two stories on your screen now for more tales that prove angels sometimes come disguised as strangers, and that the smallest gestures can change everything. Remember to subscribe to our channel for more soul-stirring stories that remind us all what truly matters in life.